All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 2023 5 Miles from Anywhere meeting. Today, our guest is John Wesley Anderson, and I am going to get my presentation going here. There we go. All right, so for today, our agenda is we'll do some announcements as we always do, and then we will have our presentation by John Wesley Anderson on his book, and you can see the cover of it there, Sherlock Holmes in Little London. And for those who don't know, Little London is Colorado Springs, which is about 100 miles south of where I live. It's a wonderful town. And it's a wonderful book too, and we'll get to hear John talk about that, as well as his current book, which, even though it's not a Sherlock Holmes book, is definitely a true crime Sherlockian type book called LOU and JonBenét, a legendary lawman's quest to solve a child beauty queen's murder. And I'll have some questions for him about that as well. And then after I ask him a little interview questions, we'll have some Q&A at the end. Okay. All right. So announcements to start with, a couple of things. And if anybody has announcements, as usual, I will pause at the end of my announcements and ask if anybody needs to announce something. Okay. So first of all, mentioned last month's meeting that in January was the first annual PSI, Broad Street Irregular dinner. This is for the Solar Pond Society. And in the Sage of Sac Prairie, the Journal of the August Society, they had a really nice write-up on it. And it was wonderful. It was great for everyone to get together. And those of you who were at the meeting, I will be sending you a copy of the journal. Everybody else, if you are not a subscriber to it, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful little magazine, and it's all in color, and I'm just really impressed with it. All right. One of our other participants here, and I believe Tom is here today. Tom Burns has a new book, just came out March 1st, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, 10 Steps from Baker Street. And I believe there's some review copies available if you'd like one. I think he can send you a link. But if you want, obviously, paperback, which is what I would prefer, order the book. Tom's a great writer. He's appeared in the Strand magazine, as well as numerous Belanger books and MX Publishing anthologies. So I highly recommend it. Tom, if you want to unmute and say something, you're welcome to. I'm not sure. Oh, there you are. Hey, man.
Yep. How's it going, Derek?
Good, good. How are you?
Good. I think I will check. I am on a website called Story Origin, and I think that you can get, I know you can get electronic review copies through Story Origin. You can just download them.
Okay.
I have to approve it, but you go, I'll send the link. You go there, you click on the link, they send me something to say, do you approve? I say yes, you get your copy. I also have paperback copies that I can send, and all you have to do is email me and ask, and I will send you one.
Excellent. Very good.
I think I have like 5, but I can order more. They take a little while to come in.
Sure.
But if you want them, I don't really need any of you guys paying for the book. It's $20. I mean, if you want to, I'll take it. But if you want to get a free copy, just let me know and I'll send you one.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom. And again, I highly recommend those of you on the meeting take Tom up on that offer. I know I will. All right. Last announcement from me. and this is actually probably some of you probably saw this on Facebook this week, but I'm in the Best Mysteries of the Year anthology from Otto Penzler and Amor Towles. My story, The Adventure of the Misquoted Macbeth, is featured in the Mysterious Bookshop Presents the Best Mysteries of the Year 2023. It was selected out of 3,000 stories or about that were published last year. And I will talk about that story and a little bit of some other Sherlock Holmes stories at the April meeting. So I'll tell you a little about at the end of this meeting what the topic will be, okay? I would like to put a plug in, though, that this story was first published in Sherlock Holmes: A Detective Life from Titan Publications. And if some of you guys are big Sherlock Holmes fans and want to just read a collection of Sherlock Holmes stories and want to read my story, recommend getting that anthology. It's got a lot of big name Sherlock Holmes authors in there, as well as me. So it was really great collection. And it's stories from when Holmes meets Watson all the way up through the end of his life. So it's a cool collection. All right. Any other announcements before I move on? There is
Derek, this is Steve. I'd like to make a couple of announcements. The first one is I want to say thank you to everybody that participated in the Legion of Zoom virtual conference on February 19th. We had a little over 140 or I think 150 people participate. Wow. And we had great presentations by everybody and a wonderful radio play. But I also want to say, if you go to the Legion of Zoom website, all of the presentations and the play are now posted, so you can watch them if you did not get a chance to see them. And then also on Facebook, if you're a member of the Strangers Room, you remember last year we did a Hounds Hysteria as part of the March Madness. Well, we are back this year doing another one. This time, what's the best story out of the canon? And so you are able to vote on stories every day, and we will declare a winner, a national champion, just like March Madness on April 3rd. So feel free to go and make your votes every day. There'll be a different poll every day on a couple of stories.
Steve, when does it launch? I remember seeing that it was going to come up, but when's
it actually launched about 3 hours ago.
All right. So after the meeting, guys, let's go play.
So, but you can vote all day. I'll calculate or tabulate the numbers each night and post the results, and then we'll keep the bracket up to date and put it up on our Legion of Zoom website every day so people can see who's winning. We have a minor upset already going on in the very first round. So
who's in the lead? Can you give us some inside information?
Well, so we're only playing 2 games a day. So the Study in Scarlet is easily winning its battle, but Illustrious Clients is doing very well against the Greek Interpreter right now. So
interesting. That is an upset. All right. Well, we very much look forward to seeing which story wins. I'm sure some of us have some ideas, but that's where it's going to end up on top. All right. Any other announcements before we move to the main event? All right. Here we go. Author John Wesley Anderson is a storyteller. He's a TEDx speaker. He enjoyed a 30-year law enforcement career and was twice elected sheriff for El Paso County, Colorado, and served in that capacity from 1995 to 2003. Prior to serving as sheriff, John was employed with the Colorado Springs Police Department, retired at the rank of sergeant in 1995. After being term limited as sheriff in 2003, John went to work for the Lockheed Martin Corporation, where he focused on corporate homeland security initiatives. In 2012, he retired from the corporate world to launch a consulting company, J.W. Anderson Associates, allowing him the freedom to pursue his passion for writing, history, and the arts. Although John has traveled around the world, including several adventures on a catamaran sailing the Caribbean, 3 corporate security assignments into a combat zone on the Horn of Africa, and landing on an aircraft carrier at sea in the Pacific Ocean, he remains most fascinated by the rich history and art discovered in his own backyard in the American Southwest. And again, wonderful author, lots of really rich Colorado history. And his book, as you see the image of LOU and JonBenét, just was released this week. And of course, today's gonna be talking about Sherlock Holmes in Little London. And I'm sure that the LOU and JonBenét book will sell quite a few copies for you, my friends. It's still a very hot topic in Colorado, 25 years after poor JonBenét was murdered. All right, and I'm going to stop my screen sharing for a minute. And I'm going to switch the view here to speaker view. There you go.
Great.
Hi, John.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to join you.
And we are glad to have you here. Would you like me to just start the slideshow?
I think so. I've really been looking forward to this presentation and sharing this story with everyone. And Derek and I had the privilege of meeting at the annual banquet in Denver, Colorado, which is about an hour and a half from my home. And we immediately hit it off. I think you find that with all of you, that we share that common interest with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. And when he told me about his show here and invited me on, I said, oh, I've got to do this with you. So I've really been looking forward to this. So what we'd like to share with you are the slide presentation that I gave that night. So Derek, let's bring that up.
Okay.
And by the way, these slides are not copyrighted. So if anyone wants a copy of them, you're more than welcome to have them. Derek can share them with you as a PDF. So let's see, let's bring up our first title slide.
Okay, there we go.
And while there we are. And let's see, will we be able to bring it up bigger? Is that why you wanted the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, let me zoom in a little bit here.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, let me give a little backstory introduction. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. So the Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients annual Sherlock Holmes birthday dinner banquet on January 21st, 2023 is when Derek and I met and when I gave this first presentation. And I had published this novel back in 2020, but I had been thinking about it for 30 years and kind of planning, the story out and how I'd like to see it come across. And I have to share my earliest memory of the first book I remember ever reading was cover to cover was when I think it might have been like in the 3rd grade, but it was Silver Blades. And I know many of you are familiar with that story, and just immediately I was hooked. And I think the librarian gave that to me so that she knew just my interests. That would keep me out of trouble, not only for that book, for the next one and the next one. And by the time I graduated high school and started on the police department in Colorado Springs, I'd read many of the stories, but it wasn't until I became a detective. I was a homicide detective for 6 years with the Colorado Springs Police Department. And that's where I met Lou Smith. He and I were homicide partners, investigated homicides. We didn't actually do homicides together, but what I did was I ended up teaching at the police academy and other academies across Colorado. And I would go back through the 56 short stories and the 4 novels. And by then I'd read them all. And I started keeping little 3x5 cards with quotes of Sherlock Holmes. And I would use those in my lesson plan. So if I was trying to teach something about the fundamentals of crime scene investigation or bloodstain pattern interpretation, then I would pull out a quote, because sometimes a quote would you'd be able to build a little story or vignette around the lesson plan and made it more interesting. And I had an opportunity to publish a white paper for a talk I was doing in Canada. And so it was the first time I really formally wrote anything on Sherlock Holmes. But this was for a forensic conference. There was about 400 people from around the world at the conference in Montreal. But some of the people there were from Scotland Yard. And I was, at first, I wondered if they were going to take this subject seriously. But they did. And everybody enjoyed the presentation to the point I was moved to a keynote speaker. And I ended up with 3 publications out of that one white paper. And I think Derek has one copy. I think that was the one that was published in Canada that I think he may have already shared with everyone. Did you already send that one out, Derek, or is that something on the to-do list?
Is it the paper that was in the Society of London journal?
Yes, it did get reprinted there. Yes.
Okay. I don't have a copy of it yet. So if you could send it, I will send it out to everyone. Okay. Definitely.
Yeah. The one I do have is published in by the Canadian Society of Forensic Science in Canada. And I can definitely get that one to you this afternoon. But anyway, back to the storyline. As in writing the book, as I studied more and more about the 56 short stories and the 4 novels, looking specifically for quotes to use in my talks, my presentations, and on my 3x5 cords, which were now growing, getting out of control, and I was doing some publication and speaking just on that, it became apparent to me that there was a missing year, and all of you are familiar with that probably, 1896, where there was a number of short stories that were being written and published by Conan Doyle, particularly in The Stand. But there's a gap in the stories that were intriguing to me from 1895. One of the awarenesses that came to me was how few of Sherlock Holmes's cases were not solved. And one of those, as you'll remember, is the story of the engineer's thumb. And that was a fascinating story with the counterfeiters, and Sherlock Holmes is chasing them. And as they're leaving their last scene of a crime, they set this mansion on fire, and you can just visualize them leaving in the buckboard with the horse-drawn wagon with the materials for this counterfeiting ring and the wooden boxes in the back. And then the story ends. And I've always been fascinated with that. Where did they go? Where did they spend the time? And why is that story not finished? Why do we not know that? So let's go to the next slide. And this is where the story begins. I think that one there. And so it begins with Sherlock and Dr. Watson in a very famous address that we all know, 221B Baker Street. And Sherlock receives a coded secret telegram from his brother Mycroft, and it's arranging for this clandestine meeting. And what we'll do is we'll go through these very quickly, and if you're interested to get Derek, can send them to you. So it has in the lower left-hand corner the chapter, and then below that a heading. And I want to share this briefly with you, particularly since many of you are also authors. You're probably familiar with this format that I'm using. It has different names, a hero with 1,000 faces, and so it's a formula for writing and structuring stories that goes back to Jason the Argonauts, back to the Greek and the Roman times. Let's go to the next slide. So on chapter 2, what we see is below that, so we go from the ordinary world to call to adventure, and then to the right are visually little cues that get fit into that chapter. And so the meeting with the Queen Victoria occurs on the South Bridge here, or on the Tower Bridge on the South Tower, and it's the Queen meeting privately with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, and she explains that there had been 6,000 coins that had appeared in the British Treasury that were counterfeit. And so that begins the story. And so that ties into the engineer's thumb with the counterfeit. And as the storyline advances, what Sherlock Holmes determines, let's go to the next slide, is that the stolen genuine gold coins had been melted down at the Whitechapel Bell factory, and were now melted down and recast as golden fire bells. So now Sherlock is pursuing the criminals with the recasted gold fire bells. And he finds that one of them is being sent to where Derek and I live in Colorado, not too far from where I live, west of Colorado Springs, in Teller County. And the place where they're going is to the Cripple Creek Fire Department. That's where the counterfeit coins melted down into the fire bells. And so they're pursuing the criminals across the pond. And in the lower left, you see that in the storyline with the hero's journey, that one of the phases early is helpers. And of course, that's what Dr. Watson is the intrepid Dr. Watson, who is the loyal friend of Sherlock Holmes and always the confident and the helper. Let's go to the next scene. So when they arrive in the States, of course, they have to go past Ellis Island, and they're going to meet in they're going to stay a couple of days in New York City, where they're going to meet a couple of famous people. And this was a fun thing to write into the book. If they were traveling on this luxury liner, who at the time would have been fascinating to be people to be traveling with? And if you were fortunate enough to have dinner at the captain's table, who would be there and what would the conversations be? And that was a fun part of the story to write. So if you're into that kind of interest, I think you'll have fun with that. When they get to New York City, they have to meet with Mark Twain. Sherlock is interested in the advancing the forensic sciences with fingerprinting. So he's visiting. So that ties in. Let's go to the next one. Sorry, I'm talking so quickly, Derek. I want to get through the slides because I'm anxious to get to the Q&A and to talk about some of the other things. So for those of you that have been to Colorado Springs, you may be familiar with the Glen Erie Castle, which was the home of General Palmer, who was the founder of Colorado Springs. And he spent a lot of time back in England, and his wife, Queen Mellon, was from there. And so the Glen Erie Castle is a beautiful castle. It still exists today. You can stay there. You can have dinners there, special events. And so I have Dr. Watson and Sherlock Holmes being a guest of General Palmer. Of course, there's, villains along the way. Next one, please. And following the hero's journey, there's going to be an approach to the innermost cave, and that's kind of that not only is it physically in the story where they're going underground, but Sherlock is facing his innermost demons and his deepest part of his psyche. And so there's issues with some drug use, alcoholism, if he's not fully engaged in his work, and the boxing, the skills that he has. So he meets with different people along the way, to include Thomas Edison and Nicholas Tesla. Now, later, Nicholas Tesla does come to Colorado Springs, where he does some of the experiments. And so, but it's not till 3 years later. So the first meeting in New York City sets up the follow-on meeting for Tesla coming to Colorado Springs for some of his experiments. Next one, please. So the story really is kind of historically accurate with the real people who lived during the time and the story. And that's what I think is so compelling or interesting about the story. And I've probably read this book, I don't know, 15 or 18 times now. I just am so thrilled with the way that it came out, and trying to emulate the voice of Dr. Watson in the journal. One thing that happens is Dr. Watson is involved in this adventure here in Colorado. He ends up leaving accidentally his pocket journal at Glen Erie Castle, and it's locked in a hidden secret vault. And then the storyline is that's not found until April of 2020, and that's when I'm writing the book. So his journal for the first half of the story is unknown, because it's been behind this secret vault in a fireplace in the Glen Erie Castle. Tied into this is another famous place here in Colorado Springs area, in Manitou Springs, is the home, the mansion of Dr. Bell. And Dr. Bell was a very close personal friend of General Palmer, and you can still go to the Briarhurst Manor. You can have dinner there and special events. Next one, please. So the other things that happen during this time historically or in Cripple Creek, which is where the fire bells go to the fire department. There are two really significant fires that happened in 1896, 4 days apart, almost certainly were arson. And so the story ties in to the counterfeiters. As they're leaving, they always clean up. They leave no a chance of being discovered. So they destroy the evidence, the scene of the crime, with fire. And this is where one of the criminals, well, I don't want to spoil the story, so I'm going to leave that one there. Let's go to the next one. But of course, you have to have, in any excitement, you have to have flight, which is your chase. And so we have Sherlock and Dr. Watson chasing the Dr. Bakersley, who's leaving Colorado Springs on the train just ahead of them. So they go from Colorado Springs to Santa Fe, New Mexico, just right behind him. And again, don't want to spoil the story, but just to set it up just a little bit, Irene Adler has to make an appearance here, and she's performing in an opera to be performed in Cripple Creek. Only the opera house is burnt down during the fire. So we have a tie-in back with Irene. Let's go to the next one, please. So the adventure goes from Santa Fe, New Mexico to the West Coast to California, San Francisco, and eventually up to the Yukon, where the next major gold strike in North America occurs. And so we have here Dr. Watson bemoaning the fact that he's been separated from his journal. He doesn't know how he's going to account for all of the expenses and never tell this story. But the agreement with the Queen was that this story wouldn't come out until at least a year after her death. Sherlock is Sherlock on this adventure on this whaling ship. This one of my favorite scenes. And so they arrived in America on this luxury sailing liner. Now they're leaving on this ancient sloop, the Gloria Scott II, and they go to the Yukon. Next one, please. And this is where the story kind of climaxes. And then from there, they end up going back across the ocean and eventually end up in Paris, where there's an experiment that Sherlock does that Dr. Watson witnesses and describes on the Eiffel Tower with some blood stains. I'm a bloodstain pattern expert, court qualified. So it's one of the reasons I was so fascinated with Sherlock. And then we have high tea back in London. And last slide, please, Derek. And so at the end with the story is Sherlock, who was successful in his pursuit of justice and his mission for the Queen, the secret mission. He is knighted by the Queen, and the young lieutenant who meets him at Windsor Castle is Winston Churchill. So we have to tie him into the story as well. So the storyline follows the hero's journey, and it's been such a successful adventure. If nothing else, in the upper or in the right-hand corner, you'll see a page number. If we had longer time when I do presentations like the one I did at the annual dinner with Derek, I picked out different readings out of the book. The book is available on Amazon.com, and as are all of my other 7 books. So Derek, let me turn it back over to you. I wasn't keeping track of the time, and I know we're on an hour time schedule, so that's why I was talking so fast, everyone. And Derek, I'll turn it over to you, see what time we have left.
Oh, we have plenty of time, my friend. We got a good 20-25 minutes here. Let me stop screen sharing for a second. And then, there it is. There we go.
Thank you.
All right. So
that was kind of a whirlwind, wasn't it?
It was.
All the way across the world and tying all the different stories.
That's I think one of the fun things about the book is the whirlwind book, and it's fun. So I'd like to ask you a few questions about this book and then a little bit about your latest, and then open it up to the group. Okay. I guess the first question I have for you is, I mean, you have a lot of historical figures in the book. One of the ones I thought, and you also have a really cool background in forensics. Perhaps I can call you an expert in the field. Would that be fair?
Oh, it is. Yeah, I am court qualified not only in bloodstain pattern interpretation, although I've not been in a courtroom for a period of time, but I was also court qualified as an expert in crime scene reconstruction. And it takes into account all of the disciplines from glass fracture examination, footprint evidence. So you may not be an expert in ballistics, but as a reconstructionist, you can render an opinion, kind of a collective opinion. And I tried to do that in the Sherlock Holmes story, but also in the story of my newest book, LOU and JonBenét. And I said before that if there ever was a Sherlock Holmes of Colorado Springs, it had to have been Detective Lou Smith.
Hold that thought. I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, I mean, one of the things I found most fascinating in the book is the knowledge of forensics. Particularly, you mentioned Mark Twain actually being very much interested in fingerprinting, and you mentioned in Hydrin. Could you give us some background on that, like the history of it? Because especially that early, we're talking 19th century forensics, and it's fascinating, what you bring up in this book, that what we had for knowledge back then. Yeah.
And the tie-in here, I think, is intriguing too, because obviously Conan Doyle was paying attention to the advancements in the forensic sciences, the fields around the world, because he was aware of what was going on in Lyons, France, with Professor Edmund Locart, L-O-C-A-R-T, who is the first person credited with what's referred to as the transfer theory of transfer, theory of interchange. Some of you are probably familiar with that, but it's known by different names. But what it communicates is the thought that whenever a crime is committed, the suspect either takes something or leaves something at the crime scene. And that's what Sherlock Holmes was always so good about. He's looking to see what the criminal left at the crime scene, what was taken from the crime scene, because that ties him back in. And sometimes this theory of interchange is referred to as a triad, where you're connecting the victim and the suspect and the crime scene. So the more frequently you can connect those, the stronger you can make that triad, the stronger your case is physically. So when you have, for example, a crime scene with a victim's body that's missing, it's part of that triad is broken, and it's really hard to solve a case. Prosecute it's extremely difficult if you don't have that victim's body. So if you do have the body of the crime scene or the physical evidence to connect that triad, it's much better off. But what Conan Doyle does, particularly in the Strand publications, is he talks about those advancements, and he's I don't know how much of this was known at the time, but he should be credited for at least documenting some of those earliest references to the forensic sciences. And I think it really fueled a lot of people's interest in advancing the forensic sciences, particularly with fingerprint identification and techniques to develop the fingerprints. And so there were early references to chemicals that would fluoresce, that would bring out the amino acids in the ridge lines that were left on a. So I think
you're breaking up a little bit.
There's a lot of people like me who probably. Sorry, how can you? Is it okay now?
Yep, you're back.
I think I was rambling there anyway, but I am trying to give through Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, credit that I think he deserves in helping advance the forensic sciences.
And that's very clear, and I think it comes across quite well in the book. And like I said, like the ninhydrin I found was fascinating, especially the fact they had like a blacklight type technology back then to see the glow. I wasn't aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. That some of these techniques that we think were, whatever, late 20th century, they were available in the late 19th century.
It's excellent. Yeah. So there are a lot of, you kind of have an interesting thing in your book because you have a lot of historical characters, but you have some fictional ones
Right.
as well. I particularly like Shady Coin because I just love the name.
Yeah.
Was he fictional or was he real? I guessed he was fictional.
He's fictional.
Okay, good.
And yeah, his brother, of course, is real. I mean,
Right.
you in the stories, but the one story that I do talk about that I tie in an 1896 tragic story is the murder of the first Colorado Springs police officer killed in the line of duty. His death occurs in Colorado Springs, line of duty death, while he's working. Benjamin Franklin Bish, B-I-S-H is his name. And so I do tie in the scene partly because his death should not be lost. And one of the men who were involved in the murder of Officer Bish was named Coney, and so that does tie into that. So yeah, I take some liberties tying in, connecting some dots that may be hard for a lot of people to see.
What, like, how did you balance that? Like in the story, like how did you balance, like, okay, I'm gonna have a fictional character, I'm gonna have a real character. Like, how did you, as an author, kind of balance that out?
What a great question, Derek. If there was a real character that I could bring in, I would try to do that. But when I wrote the story in 2020, not all of the Sherlock Holmes stories were in the public domain. So I had to be a little cautious at the time. The first 40 short stories, and I think the 4 novels were there. Now, as of January of 2023, at least here in the States, all of the Sherlock Holmes books, novels, all you're probably familiar with that, are now considered to be in the public domain, but at the time it wasn't. And the other thing I had to be a little concerned about, especially with like Irene Adler, as in 1896, she was still very much alive. She does get killed off, in some of the movies with Robert Downey Jr. and, by Professor Moriarty. That doesn't happen in the original series. So I can't refer to, her in the past tense because, not only was that not right in the timeline, I would be stealing something from, a movie. And so I had to be very aware of the characters that other people created.
But whether or not she's deceased in the story is definitely open to interpretation. I think she was.
Well said. Very good.
For the interest of time, I want to switch gears a little bit to your latest book, because you mentioned that Lou Smith, your friend, that you called him, if there was a modern day Holmes, it was right. Him. And I want you to talk a little about Lou and about your friendship, maybe just introduce him to us.
I will. Lou and I had a wonderful adventure together. He passed on in 2010 due to cancer, but he was probably the most capable, thorough homicide detective in general that I had ever met. And on the cover of the book are 2 photos. Can we bring up that book photo for everybody, the cover? Again, if it's not difficult, I'd like people to see these 2 photos that were selected for the cover. Every story is about people, places, and events. And if it's too difficult, Derek, that's okay. I can just hold the book up here and kind of.
It might be easier because I have to find it. But
yeah. Don't worry about it. We showed it earlier. But the photo of Lou Smith, who was my best friend, that photo was taken on January 10th, 1995. The reason I remember that date, it was the date I was sworn in as the sheriff of El Paso County. So when I was elected sheriff, I was with Colorado Springs Police Department, took an early retirement, came to the police department, and I talked Lou into becoming my captain of detectives, to reorganize the detective bureau, but more importantly, to focus on a 4-year-old cold case of a kidnap murder in the unincorporated area of Colorado Springs, El Paso County. And the victim in that case was a 13-year-old girl by the name of Heather Dawn Church. And it was difficult because her body was not found until 2 years after she was abducted. So again, with that triad, when you have one link missing out of that triad, it's really a challenge. But in this case, 2 years later, 4 years after the kidnap murder, the case had really gone cold. And my concern was that this killer was still in our community, preying on other victims. And so what I asked Lou to do was to come in as my captain detectives, take over that investigation and focus on finding that killer. And he did. And so this photograph is of him on that first day he took over the case officially to solve the Heather Dawn Church kidnap murder. Within 11 weeks, using the same physical evidence that had been there all along, he was able to, with his team, he had a good team of detectives, and I gave him unlimited resources. I told him you have complete control of the case. If you need money, I'll go find it. I'll better, whatever for the budget. And so that's my job. Your job is to chase the killer down. But within 11 weeks, he had found the killer and arrested him by the name of, the guy's name was Robert Charles Brown, B-R-W-N-E, the English spelling. And he he was one of their closest neighbors, lived just within a half a mile of the victim's residence. But by the time Lou and his team had finished with this investigation, the suspect not only pled guilty in court to the first-degree murder of Heather Dawn Church, but he also pled guilty to another murder in Colorado Springs and confessed to Lou and his team to a total of 49 other murders. So if true, that would make him one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. He's still in the state penitentiary, but in Colorado. So there's a lot of tragic cases there. But the point I bring that up, and I do go into some detail in LOU and JonBenét, was to talk about Lou's qualifications and his experience. There's not a lot of people who have investigated kidnaps and murders that violent of a nature that what we saw in Boulder. And so when that case happened in Boulder, Colorado, it wasn't in our jurisdiction. In fact, Lou had retired by then from the district attorney's office. He had worked for 4 law enforcement agencies in the Colorado Springs area, the police department where he and I were, Colorado Springs, the coroner's office, the district attorney's office, and then the sheriff's office. So he really knew homicide investigations from being the street cop to the detective to the medical legal part. So he was really uniquely qualified. So when the district attorney in Boulder, Colorado, was putting together a task force to tackle the Ramsey investigation, he called me and he asked if I would recommend Lou be part of that task force. I said, absolutely. I said, as best decision I made as a new elected official. I suggest you do exactly what I did, put Lou in charge, give him unlimited resources and support. Tragically, that didn't happen. And Lou constantly battled the Boulder police. There was animosity between the DA's office and the police department. It got to the point after about 1.5 years, Lou said, this case is headed to the grand jury. We use grand juries in Colorado. And he says, my fear is that this family is going to be indicted by this grand jury for a crime they didn't commit. These are innocent victims who suffered the tragedy of the murder of their daughter. And nobody, to include Boulder police, is even looking at pursuing this. What Lou came up with was an intruder theory. And the physical evidence supported what Lou had come up with, to include foreign DNA that was available on the little girl's fingernails and on her clothing within 3 weeks of the murder that eliminated the Ramsey family. And that was not publicly disclosed. In fact, Lou was at the DA's office at the time that lab report was presented to the prosecutor, but it was 7 months after it was given to the Boulder detectives. So one of the reasons for me to write the book now was to expose some of the misperceptions and the untruths, to include the fact that DNA within 3 weeks of the murder eliminated John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, Burke Ramsey, all the members of the Ramsey family. And so when people would say, oh, I think it was, whoever, the dad or the mom or the brother, they did not know that there had been physical evidence in the form of DNA that not only eliminated the Ramsey family, but it identified that the DNA was male, excludes all females, and it was an unknown person. And that fit with the other theories that Lou had. And if you're interested in a little bit more on that case, if you go to my publisher's website, wildbluepress.com, what you'll find is some blogs that I had written and some very clear evaluation on the physical evidence that the killer had to have brought into the crime scene and had to have taken with him, to include a stun gun that was used on the little girl. This was a very violent, the murder of JonBenét was a very violent murder. The other thing I wanted to do on the book cover was to use a photograph that was not one of these tabloid glamour shots. Now, she did participate in child pageantry. She loved that. Her mother was a former Miss America contestant, and that was just something that they loved to do and share. But the photograph I wanted was to make like she was, like how Lou saw her. He didn't see her as a beauty queen. He saw her as a little 6-year-old innocent little girl. And this was taken by Patsy Ramsey, her mother, on the first day of kindergarten. So she has her dressed up in this little dress. Patsy died 4 years later. But when I was getting ready to publish this book, I contacted her father and I showed him the makeup, the artwork for the photo, and it had this photo of Lou, and I had a different photo of JonBenét. And her dad, John Ramsey, said, you know, that's a good photo. I've always liked that one, but I like this one better. And so JonBenét's father sent that photograph of JonBenét's first day of kindergarten, and that was one of his favorite photos. And I'm honored that he allowed me to use that for the cover of the book.
Thank you. And we're almost we're hitting 10:50 here, so at least in Colorado time. One question from the audience, and I'm going to open it up for everyone. I've gotten a couple on the chat and even on my phone, but remind us the three elements of triad. I feel like I only got 2 of them. Could you repeat the elements again?
I'm sorry, I missed that. That was a question for me.
Could you repeat the 3 elements of triad? I've gotten a couple of people asking about it.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a great one. Yeah, it is connecting the suspect to the crime scene and the victim. So it's victim, suspect, victim, crime scene, victim. So any of those 3 points, the more you can connect the victim and the suspect, they knew each other, had threatened her, had been following her, the more you can connect the victim to the location, the crime scene, and the more you can connect the suspect to the crime scene. So the more frequently you connect suspect, victim, crime scene, the stronger your case will become.
Excellent. I have questions, but I'm going to open it up. Would anyone like to chime in with a question? You can either use the raise hand feature or just unmute and ask. You're so thorough. I don't know. People, I think people are still digesting it.
I'll make a comment. What I've tried to do in some of the stories in 10 Steps is to present Holmes as a pioneer of some modern forensic techniques. One I used in one story was geographical profiling.
All right.
Used in my story, The Camberwell Poisoner, which it doesn't match to the one that Conan Doyle talked about. But, you know, where Holmes is trying to track down an unknown person in London who is randomly poisoning people. So, you know, I'm going to be interested to see in your book, you know, how you bring in these 19th century forensic techniques, because the more I can learn about that, the better my own stories will be.
Oh, absolutely. And I do think we all can learn so much from Conan Doyle's writing and how he presented characters that were just so real. You know, Sherlock and Dr. Watson, you know, if you saw them walking down the street in London, I haven't been there, but you know, you'd know them, you'd know who they were, even though that they were portrayed, you know, by different people. what I hope is that someday this book will get in the hands of someone, a movie producer who is interested in pursuing it, because there's so many wonderful tie-ins to the story. And as Sherlockians, you're going to enjoy coming across these little jewels where you'll recognize something from earlier stories that maybe others who are not quite as studied in the short stories and the 4 novels. So I tried to embed little jewels. A good example is the name of the ship that they're on going to the Yukon, the Gloria Scott II. So you'll have fun with some of those. The captain of the ship, you'll have fun recognizing him, and some of the tie-ins with other books and stories, and as well as the Conan Doyle's.
One question just came in through the chat is just so you had quite an extensive career, but what made you decide to become a writer?
Well, what a great question. I have loved to read since I was just a little boy, and the adventures in the places it would take you to. And growing up, I was influenced very heavily by Gene Roddenberry, who wrote the original Star Trek series, and love that. But if I look back in my life and who I was influenced most by, 2 writers stand out: Gene Roddenberry and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And so, not that I could ever rise to the level either of them did, but I do think there is a chance, that maybe you can, through your writing, this is what I try to do, is to honor those people that shaped our past and inspire those people that will shape our future. And that's what I hope the stories do.
Excellent. I think that's a great note to end on. That was a very nice way to wrap it. Thank you. Let's give a virtual round of applause to John. Thank you so much for taking your time out this morning. It is morning here in Colorado to talk to us. And I will send a follow-up email to the group, and I will have all of John's books listed in there. He sent me a nice PDF of all 7 of his books, especially if you're interested not only in Sherlock Holmes, but in history of the West, and Native American research as well. He's got quite an extensive collection of books, and he's a great guy, as you can tell. So he did a really nice job, and I'm sure your book, LOU and JonBenét, I think that's just going to be a big book, especially here, and I look forward to reading it myself. So thank you for that. And then for next month, I'll be on stage. I'll present. I'll talk a little about my story, but really my topic's going to be Sherlock Holmes as literature. So what Sherlock Holmes stories and pastiches rise to the level of literature, and what exactly should we consider to be literature? And that will be my discussion for April. Thank you all again for spending an hour with us today. It's always fun, and I look forward to seeing you next month. And a shout out from Colorado's Dr. Watson's Neglected Patients. Larry Feldman's also on. He was at the dinner as well and met John. And Michael Newman's on as well. He's also a member, and so is Jeff Played on. Michael didn't make the dinner this year, but it was great. Thank you all again for coming, and we'll be in touch, and I look forward to seeing you in April. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Derek. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Derek. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. John, thank you so much for being on here.
You're welcome. That was fun. It was a fast hour, wasn't it?
It goes quick. And I try to make it go quick, because some people complain that these meetings go too long. So I try to make it not go too long. Hey, and now we got the Colorado group on, because everyone left is Larry's on and Jeff's on.
Oh.
Yeah, I just want to say hi, John.
Well, hi there. Thanks again for being a part of this. It's good to see you too.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it.
Well, I'm a regular participant of Derek's group here, so
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
I'm always there. So.
And Larry, you saw my message. I can't make the meeting tomorrow, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
I sent you an email, but I might
Oh,
try
too
to
bad.
go. What's
You
that?
know, it's too bad because I wanted to talk to you about your story.
I know.
And it's actually, you've got something key there about, Sherlock Holmes being literature, that in most Sherlock Holmes stories, they're Watson and Holmes are flat characters.
Right.
Nothing ever really, they never really change or learn anything new. But in your story, Watson learns something new. So he's
Right.
more of a round character. So it pushes it up there towards literature a little bit.
If I can, if I can make it down to the tail end, because I'd like to see if I can get it over to the art show too.
I understand.
Yeah. So if I can make it, I might send you a message and be like, hey, try to make it. Okay.
All right. Well, it's all right.
Yeah.
It's not you're running in and out doesn't do much
Sure.
anyway. No, it's up to you. But
John, when I get
understand.
sometime next month, maybe we can get together. I'd like to meet you for coffee or something if it works.
I'd love that. Thank you for hosting this. This was really a kick. I enjoyed it.
And I had my school I work at had a school play last night, so I wasn't able to go on to your talk. I was looking forward to it, and then I saw I had a conflict. But you're doing a signing in person, aren't you, coming up?
Oh, yes, April 7th. Yes, at the library here, or library, branch library in Colorado Springs. If you get a chance to come to that one, please do. I'd love to have you part of that.
What day of the
April
week is that? Is April
It's
7th?
a Friday,
What time?
4 to 5:30.
What I might do is take off a little early from work and go down for that, because I don't think I've got a schedule.
That'd be great.
So
The address is 5550 North Union Boulevard in Colorado Springs. It's the East Branch Library, the Pikes Peak Library District. Yeah. You don't have to do any reservation or anything for that one. The virtual one, you did have to sign up just to get the,
Sure.
the Zoom link, like what you send out. But that one is just, show up. I'll have copies of the book, and we'll look at some of the slides that are not in the book of LOU's that are online in the photo gallery on my publisher's website. So I think it'll be an interesting presentation, but it'd be nice to see you again.
Yeah. I will do my best to make that. All right.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Larry,
you.
it's good to see you and talking to you again. You guys take care. Have a good rest of the weekend.
Yeah,
Great.
you too. Take care. I think I got to wrap up because I got to run. But thank you. Maybe I'll bump into you tomorrow, Larry. We'll see what happens. Okay.
Okay, no
All right.
problem.
Take care. Bye.